There are longevity gurus who are trying to live to be 120. And I say, hey, man, my days are numbered. So I can't add any days to your life or my life, but I could add life to my days. So if I'm supposed to die at 85, I'm dying at 85. But I would prefer to do that playing with my grandkids and great grandkids versus in a bed or a wheelchair due to complications of diabetes that was 100% preventable because I couldn't put the candy bars down.
Hello and welcome to the March or Die Show today. Very glad to have you joining this conversation. Excited about the interview you are about to hear. This is, of course, the show where I do my best every single episode to give you the principles and perspectives you need to make the decision to march, putting one foot in front of the other when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. So many people give up, and that death is not the physical kind. It is that emotional and spiritual and relational death. It's just giving up. It's saying I can't go on anymore. And I understand so much of, the obstacles and the challenges and the traumas of life that lead many to that decision. But when we find ourselves in the midst of those fights, we need to make the better decision, the decision to march. And this is a show where we talk about that every episode. Glad to have you along and looking forward again to this conversation, which I'll talk about here in just a second. Before I do, though, if you have not yet subscribed to the show, please do that right now. Go ahead and subscribe. That lets you know when more content like this is pushed your direction, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on YouTube. I'd love for you to subscribe and continue to join the conversation. Leave comments, send questions, whatever the case. Glad to have you along. One of the areas that I talk about often, mostly in passing, but I talk about often is the area of physical health. I've talked about doing difficult things physically and the importance of keeping our bodies healthy and really stewarding over what God has given us to do. I personally live under the belief that very little of life is under my control. And again, I know that God is in control of everything, but very little in life is under my control. I can't control what other people do. I can't always control the circumstances that I find myself in, the hurts or even the good things that come into my life. I can't always control those. But the one thing I can control is my physical health. Now, there are diseases. There are other things that come along. I get it. But I can control. I can decide whether or not I'm going to move, eat the right things, get myself in a place physically in shape where I am then able to do the things that God has called me to do. And wherever you find yourself physically, you need to be a good steward of what God has given to you. And I know we're not all in the same place, but we need to steward well over the bodies that God has given to us. What we lack sometimes as Christians, as people of faith, is a theology, a biblical reason, a Christian understanding of why physical health is important, which is why I'm very excited to share this interview with you, this conversation with you. My guest today is Anthony Diehl. Anthony describes himself as a husband, a father, a prep and lifestyle coach, pro strongman, bodybuilder. He trains Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He does business coaching. Just a great person, well-rounded person, a Christian person, a man of faith who understands why, again, from a biblical perspective, he does the things that he does, how they connect and apply to the other areas of his life. And it was important to me to have this conversation, one, because he has a great story, just as a human, as a person, does some really interesting things that are interesting to me. He is a Christian that understands his faith and really has a grasp on, why he does the things that he does and the direction that he is going as a husband, as a father, the way that he lives from a theological or biblical perspective, very, very important. But then he is, again, firmly in the fitness world professionally. He trains, he competes, but also as a coach. And so this is very important to him. And he speaks so clearly on the importance, the reason why. Why do we care for our bodies? And then even as we go through this conversation, what are some of the important first steps to do that? Very, very important conversation, very helpful conversation. I know that you'll be encouraged and blessed, maybe even challenged by this. And I trust that it will be a help to you. So without further ado, my guest, Anthony Diehl. Anthony, thanks for joining me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure.
This is a conversation I'm excited about. we'll get into an area that I spend a lot of time talking about personally, but as I mentioned before we started, I'm not an expert. It's one of my soapbox issues, right? Like, take care of your body. You need to take care of what God's given you. But this is your world, and this is what you focus on. So I appreciate you coming on and helping us understand this a little bit better. For those that aren't familiar with you, though, give us your background. You have not always been, a coach and
That's right.
doing the things that you're doing. So what was the trajectory to get you to where you are right now?
Well, if you would have said 15 years ago, hey, you're going to one day own a business where you coach people and help them live healthier lifestyles,
Right.
I would have just laughed at you, because 15 years ago, I was fat. So I guess about 16 years ago, I went to college and I gained the freshman 50.
Yeah.
And I was very overweight, and I didn't have a very deep intrinsic why. I just remember being in the dorm room of some of my college buddies who were cutting for a wrestling competition. And so they're weighing themselves. And the last I knew, I'm like, I'm 220. Okay, whatever. And this is not a strong 220. This is 220 and soft and
Right.
weak. And so I jumped on the scale and it said 260. And I'm like, whoa. and I just realized, hey, like this is not cool. And so I went into the gym the next morning and I said, I'm going to run as many laps as I possibly can until I can't. And I made it 6.
Yeah.
So, and so I said, okay, I know nothing about fitness or nutrition. I just now need to move, and I'm going to eat meat and vegetables. Like, that's what I'm going to eat 6 days a week. Now, I went to a Christian college. I grew up as a Christian. So I was traveling with the school on the weekends with a music and kind of ministry team. So hanging out with youth groups, doing all that sort of stuff. So, and I grew up Baptist, so we know how to eat.
What college did you go to?
Northland Baptist Bible College.
Yeah. Okay.
In Wisconsin. Are you familiar?
Yeah. I am familiar. I went to Pensacola Christian College down in Pensacola. So,
all right. I know I've got some friends from PCC.
Interesting. Well, don't hold that against me. But anyhow, took us on a detour there. I was just curious. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty small and very specific world, right? So
it's a very small, very specific world. Yeah. We could rabbit trail off that.
Yeah,
but we
won't do it. But yeah, interesting.
It'd be another podcast. And so I was traveling for them, and on the weekends we're in churches and youth groups, things like that. So they're feeding you pizza, pasta, and ice cream.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, I'll eat one serving of whatever is served to me on a Sunday and enjoy myself. And then Monday through Saturday is meat and veggies. And I lost like 90 pounds in about 8 months.
That's crazy.
And then I hurt my hip because I went from chubby kid to super active. I ran every day, rain, snow, sleet, didn't matter.
Yep.
And I was really bummed. I'm like, man, I hurt my hip. What am I going to do? And a buddy of mine was like, well, since you can't run, come to the gym with me. And I'm not trying to brag at all. This, just to be honest, I walked in the gym. I was very weak, and then I realized very quickly I was built to be strong. Within a year of lifting, I was repping 300 pounds on bench press with horrible form. Training legs barely. I did all the things wrong that you could do, but I was strong.
Yeah.
And so I realized that inner fat kid, like I was built to just be thick. And so that's where I started the love of physical training. But where I really dug into health would probably be about 7-8 years later, when my middle son was diagnosed with autism. When he was diagnosed with autism, that's where my wife and I went down the rabbit hole of everything we could possibly do to help his speech and occupational therapy. And naturally, that's going to involve nutrition. And initially, we were removing gluten and dairy from his diet and doing all these things and doing it just for him. The rest of the family were just eating as normal. Now, my wife never cooked unhealthy, but we're just, standard American diet. So eventually that became too burdensome for my wife. So I said, hey, look, babe, we're just in this house right now in this season of life. Just cook everything like we're cooking for Haddon. We're eating whole foods. We're eating all that. And so at the time I was competing in strongman, and that was the only variable that changed. My performance went through the roof by just prioritizing whole food and fixing my nutrition. And so that piqued my curiosity as a strength athlete, to that point in time, when you think of powerlifters, you think of really strong dudes, but typically obese, right?
Sure.
So then I'm realizing, oh, wait, so positive health can have an actual impact, a positive impact on performance as well. You not only look better, but you perform better. So cool. And so that, what drove me into that world were very practical reasons. I wanted to help my son. I would say that my theology of fitness and the body has evolved and come along since then.
Right.
Because like I
Right.
said, I got into it for very practical reasons of mainly helping
Right.
my children.
Yeah. What, just to kind of, set the conversation, can you talk about your faith journey a little bit when you accepted Christ, when that became important to you? It's funny. I kind of differentiate because, I accepted Christ as a young person in my parents' home. But it became real to me and important to me much later in life. So talk about your faith journey a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in a Christian home. Very thankful for that. Parents who loved each other and loved the Lord. I was in church. I grew up an independent fundamental Baptist, in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, revival meeting, and every other time between.
Right.
So, and
you just described my childhood.
My dad was a deacon. I apologize for my throat here. Something's going around, and I have been blessed to dodge it so far. So far. Anyways, my dad was a deacon. My mom was a treasurer of the church. We were very involved. So thankful for that. Thankful for my heritage. Grew up in Sunday school in Awana, memorizing Bible verses. Yeah. And I have an interesting childhood, and my parents were amazing. I'll give you the brief story really fast. My mom passed away 2 years ago to breast cancer, but when she was young, she did not have a good childhood. And her parents were divorced, abusive stepfather. She was raped when she was 16, and she had me and decided to keep me. My dad, who is my hero, married my mom when I was 3. He the story goes that my grandfather tells me is that my dad came to him and said that he would like permission to adopt me and marry his daughter. Wow. And my dad sold his prized Mustang so that he could afford to adopt me. Wow. And so I do remember my parents' wedding at 3, and then mom went through a lot of counseling over the years to deal with the trauma of her childhood and the trauma of sexual abuse and things like that. And she did overcome that and started counseling unwed mothers herself. And so there were many times where I can think of multiple times where different women would live in the basically downstairs kind of basement of our house for a few days, a few weeks if they needed a place to stay. And my mom would counsel them biblically, and my dad would sit at the kitchen table and work on very practical things like, hey, here's how you balance a checkbook. Here's how you write a budget. Here's how you dress for an interview. Here's how you shake someone's hand, look them in the eye, like get them set up for practical life, because clearly a lot of these women were in a place where they didn't have that. Yep. And so my parents used that. So I share that just to say, I'm the very definition of blessed in terms of my childhood. Right. And I would say that I truly came to faith in Christ when I was 18, and unironically, the preaching, the Holy Spirit, but specifically during a sermon. You may know him growing up in the same circles, Tom Farrell. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've heard him many times. Double barrel Farrell. Yeah. I've heard him many times. All right. And so, this is going to be a very odd combination since you know these two. It was a combination of him preaching, and while I would run, I would listen to sermons from John Piper. Okay, like I am the young, restless, and reformed. Yeah. And so that was my generation. Yeah. And so I'd be running, and I will never forget. I was a bit of the older brother in the prodigal son story. So all my friends in high school were running around doing stupid things. I was the leader of the youth group. I was preaching in nursing homes, going on mission trips, doing all this stuff, because somewhere it clicked in me like, hey, if I do all these good things, all the authority figures in my life think well of me, and my life goes smoothly. Yeah. And so I was not doing stupid things. I was falling in line. Well, I remember a sermon that John Piper preached, and essentially it was from Isaiah, and he was talking about how God will not he will not share his glory with another. And something in that sermon, I just remember that playing that phrase, the idea over and over and over again. And then paired with a sermon by Tom Farrell, I just realized like, hey, I'm using God. Like, this is horrible. I literally, my entire life trajectory was, this is what you do in IFB world, is you go to a Bible college, you become a youth pastor, you go to seminary, then you become a youth pastor, senior assistant pastor, senior pastor, and maybe even a college president. And like, that's the arc for success in IFB world. And that's the path I was on. And I realized like, dude, it's one thing to use other things for selfish means. You're literally using God as a means to your own end to build a name for yourself in this little bubble. And to all of my authorities and leaders in my life, I was the good kid. I was the leader. I was like the one. So that broke me. That was my freshman year of college. So I would say that's when I truly understood. I always understood the gospel from an intellectual perspective, but that's when I realized my own brokenness and insufficiency.
Yeah. Man, that's such an interesting, and I will say familiar story, not to probably a lot of other people, but certainly to me. You mentioned Tom Farrell, the opening service of my first year of college. So the very first chapel service we had, Tom Farrell preached, and I'll never forget it. He preached a message called Death in the Pot. And he talked about how, any measure of sin in your life poisons everything else. Right. And at 18 years old, hearing that message, it really caused me to go, oh yeah. Cause man, very similar coming from that, growing up in church and, being in the youth group. My dad was a pastor. He was the pastor of our church. And so you really learn how to do the right things, and the people around you will respond to that. And not all of that's bad, and I think people throw rocks at independent Baptist churches in the movement, sometimes unnecessarily. But yeah, that place where it has to become real to me and personal to me. And I was probably 25, 26. I was in the Marine Corps when my faith became, and I do believe I accepted Christ when I was younger. You couldn't talk me off of that, but
Sure.
It really became real to me, when I was a little bit older, and I can think of the exact spot that happened. So that's really interesting. That has to happen though, right? That's not even the point of our conversation today, but I think if people don't come to that place where faith is real to you and you're examining it for yourself and understanding why you believe this, and not just because your parents, or your pastors or others told you to, if you don't come to that place, then you end up in that world of what is now being called deconstruction, which is like, I didn't know what I believed anyhow, but now I'm mad at everybody. That's really important to come to that place where you're like, okay, I get it. This is a personal relationship with God.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
How did that frame? So you did some other things before you got into, kind of the fitness industry, so to speak.
That's right.
And, you do a lot of coaching, you do influencing, you do those things that would be, I guess industry is the right word. It's kind of under that umbrella.
Right.
But you said your theology around the fitness world developed later. Why is it that, at least from where you sit, that the Christian world or the church world doesn't have a developed theology of stewarding over the body that God has given to us?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons there. This is not at all, there's a couple theological reasons. This is not at all to throw shade at, dispensationalists. But I think as a whole, there's a lot of pietism, typically in American culture, going back to the 1700s, a lot of escapist theology. Jesus is coming back next Thursday, and we just need to hunker down and wait for him. So what's the point? Now, and I realize some of the biggest heroes of my faith are dispensationalists.
Sure.
And so, not throwing shade, but I think there is like this undercurrent of escapist sort of theology, right? So you pair that also just with the idea that theology is never done out of boredom, right? So in the 300s, it wasn't a bunch of Bible college students sitting around drinking coffee and they're like, hey, you know what? Let's clarify the doctrine of the Trinity. They didn't do that. Right. It was born out of controversy. And I say that to say, what we're seeing now with the health and obesity epidemic wasn't a thing until the beginning of our grandparents' generation. The first supermarket with processed food didn't come in the United States until post-World War II. So this is a new thing. It's a new problem. And so in some ways, I kind of don't fault my parents or my grandparents. They didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. There's unintended consequences of things. Yeah. And so this is a new problem. It's a new thing that's arisen. Up until 10 minutes ago, you didn't have to tell somebody 200 years ago, hey, you should get 10,000 steps a day. Everything was agrarian. That was just, it was just existing. Yeah. Right. When you don't have refrigerators, when you don't have processed food, you're eating real whole food. Everybody has a horse. That's their main mode of transportation. Everybody has a garden. You're doing manual labor.
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason is we don't have a fully baked theology of the body is because it just wasn't a thing for the common person to even have to consider.
Yeah.
right? And so it's a new thing. So now we need to consider it, right? I teach high school logic 2 days a week. And I was talking to my students last week and I said, hey, the meaning of a text never changes. What matters is what the author said. The application may change, the meaning may not. And so now the reality is for us, we have to consider what applications, read the scriptures, and does the scriptures have application for our physical bodies? It does. And we haven't had to consider them until this recent generation.
Yeah. Interesting. Like so many other issues that we would kind of lump into the cultural or social issues, right? The Bible does talk about these, but there was general consensus across lines of faith about what is right and what is wrong. So yeah, that makes sense.
I think perfect example. Sometimes, like when Paul says, does not nature itself teach you it's shameful for a man to have long hair?
Yeah.
That is my favorite. To me, that's hilarious because he's not, oftentimes when he's making an argument, he's quoting the Old Testament, he's rooting things in creational order or in Trinitarian relationship. Like there's this complex argument. And Paul here, he's like, hey man, this is a duh. Like sky is blue,
Right.
cows go moo. Doesn't nature itself teach you?
Right.
Like I don't need to ground this in anything other than my eyes are open and I'm a thinking being. And so some things are just assumed, right? And a lot of times, a lot of the texts around physical fitness and things like that, I think are just, they're assuming things and it's kind of descriptive, and we should take that and pattern our lives. For example, Lot gets kidnapped. Abraham takes 300 of his trained men. Okay. That assumes he has men and is trained. Like the assumption there is Abraham has some kind of martial virtue and is able to just go and get Lot back. He didn't call the authorities. He took responsibility for his own family and went and handled business because they were trained men. So Abraham clearly trained. There's no argument there building up for like why God told Abraham to go train. This was just part of life. This is what you do if you're a man.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think where I run into frustration, I guess, again, from the church world is there are so many areas that we're willing to jump up and down on in terms of discipline, right? And I know some very disciplined people who are disciplined over things that really are inconsequential, but they're important to them. And the reason that is typically given is we need to do this so we can better serve God or serve God's purposes or fulfill God's plan for our lives. And yet there has been historically, and again, I think your explanation makes sense, but there has been historically this blind spot of, but that doesn't apply. The discipline over here doesn't apply to my physical body, which is insane to me since our physical body is the only vehicle we have to actually accomplish God's will and fulfill his plan for our lives. And the disconnect there to me is, man, it's really interesting. I think it's just a stewardship issue. And I've said this many, many times. Taking care of yourself is a stewardship issue. This is the one area or one of very few areas that you can actually control.
Sure.
And God can use you to the extent that you're willing to put in the time and effort to be healthy. And that's a tough thing for me to understand.
If you have that mentality though of, hey, this world is not my home, I'm just passing through.
Yeah, sure.
There's this closet sort of Platonism seeping through that material is bad and physical and spiritual is good. So we should be heavenly minded. Set your minds on things above, right? It's that passage where, well, godliness is of some, or physical discipline is of some value, but godliness is greater.
Bodily exercise, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going, hey, you understand how this a fortiori argument works, right? Is he takes something that's very good and he says, if this is good, then this is even better. So if Paul didn't have some kind of respect for bodily exercise, he wouldn't have used that as a comparison to spiritual disciplines. So he's not saying, hey, bodily exercise doesn't matter. He's saying it's really important.
Right.
And because it's this important, godliness is even more important. It's not either or, it's both and.
So, okay. So that explanation is it makes a lot of sense. So what has happened, or what I've seen happen, this is my view from where I sit, is a lot of people in the church world have, as they have with a lot of things, overcorrected. So now we have almost this idea amongst a lot of church leaders, particularly in kind of the new evangelical movement and, kind of that world, that fitness lifting, working out, doing whatever. That's almost a means in itself. So we've gone from we don't care about this to, this now is an end. And so I think the theology and the understanding of why we do what we do becomes important, not just for those who don't care, but for those who do care, right? And we have to understand why does any of this matter? So if you were to say, this is why it matters as a Christian, as a husband, as a father, as a mom, whatever, this is why this matters. Again, kind of having a larger view than just what's happening right in front of us. What's the explanation for that? Why does this matter?
Well, so I think I need to do a little bit more thought. I'm sure I could spitball some stuff here specifically for women, but I'm typically thinking and speaking to men about this.
Sure.
And I always say, like, hey, being fit and in shape doesn't make you necessarily a better man, but it will make you better at being a man. I know a lot of in shape, great dudes that are horrible, like in shape, great physical dudes that are horrible dudes, right? Deadbeat dads and everything else. But if your job as a man is to protect and provide and rule over your family, if you are fit, you will do that better. Period. Full stop.
Yeah.
Right. If you are so overweight that you get winded running or walking to check your mail, you're not running out into the road to get your little girl out of the road if she chases a ball and a car comes down. You're not equipped if someone, mugs your family, God forbid. And people are, well, those things don't happen. Or the worst is I've had people argue with me because they're full on Calvinists. They've gone the whole direction of, and I would subscribe to that, but they go this direction of, well, God's sovereign, and turn it into kind of this fatalist thing. Like, the Lord has numbered our days. And that's true. And so this is why in my industry, I'm always talking about, listen, there are longevity gurus who are trying to live to be 120. And I say, hey man, my days are numbered. So I can't add any days to your life or my life, but I could add life to my days. So if I'm supposed to die at 85, I'm dying at 85, but I would prefer to do that playing with my grandkids and great grandkids versus in a bed or a wheelchair due to complications of diabetes that was 100% preventable because I couldn't put the candy bars down.
Yeah, that's good. I've said often, so I run ultra marathons a couple times a year. I try to lift to be healthy. I train jujitsu, which I know you do as well. So I do these things, and people have asked, like, you spend a lot of time doing this, right? And I don't think it's that much time, but why do you do it? And I've had to really think through that. And I want what I do in the physical, whether it's running or lifting or training, whatever it is, to support my life, not the other way around. And I think this is where, kind of the ditch on either side of the road, right? I think we can get to the point where, well, you're doing that because that's what you enjoy or that's what you're about or whatever. I don't ever want the physical activity, the training, the working out, the running. I don't want that to become why I live. I don't want my days to be ordered around, I need to go do that. And instead, I want that to support the life that God has given to me. I view it very similar to keeping your finances in order. If God asks me to go to the mission field or leads me to go do something, I want to have my house in order so I can do that, right? My financial house in order. Physically is the same. I mean, the thought that God would have something for me that I was physically incapable of doing, that's a scary thought to me.
Sure.
Yeah, man, there's a lot there, right? And so when we talk about this idea or this principle of march or die, and people who listen to the show, when I talk about those decisions, you can move forward or you can stay where you are and die, you can give up, you can quit. We all will encounter difficulties, trials, obstacles in our lives. And there are a lot of ways to deal with those and to address those, which are the principles that we talk about here. But some people just don't have the physical energy or the ability to march. And so it's not a decision to stay where they are, at least not right now. They made the decision a long time ago, and so they don't have the ability to move forward, which is why this is such an important conversation to me. When you talk about this to people who would say, man, maybe I haven't stewarded over my physical health well, maybe I haven't taken care of myself, or, I'm 47 years old. My son and his wife are getting ready to have their first baby, so we're gonna have a grandchild. So I'm looking like kind of down that road a little bit, right? But there are some people who are like, man, I haven't taken care of myself into my late 40s or 50s or whatever, but I have grandkids. I have other things I want to accomplish, and so I have to start now. When you're giving advice to someone who gets it, light bulb comes on. I need to take care of my body. I don't want to compete in the strongman competition. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not going to go run an ultra marathon. I don't like rolling around on the ground with sweaty people, right? So jiu-jitsu's out, right? But I do want to take care of myself. What do you tell them? What are here's where you start, and here are kind of the basic building blocks you need to have in place.
Yeah, I encourage people right out of the gate, like the bar for physical fitness is achievable by anybody. So guys will look at me, and I get it. It's kind of a branding marketing issue because I'm constantly preaching health and fitness and all these things. And then they see this jacked tatted dude doing jujitsu and lifting 400-pound stones and all that stuff. And they think, okay, well, 1 and 1 equals 2. That's his definition of health and fitness.
Yeah, right.
And so I'm constantly beating this drum of, guys, the bar for physical fitness, and the bar for fitness as a man, I define it as you need to be physically capable. Okay. Just be physically capable. You don't need a 300-pound bench. You don't need abs. Abs are overrated. Okay. These things that I'm pursuing are things that I just do enjoy, and I like pushing myself physically. But listen, I work with a ton of people who are obese. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to just start getting your step count up. Just move. And you don't have to do it all at once. Start with 3 10-minute walks a day. I have one guy right now who's 600 pounds. And 5 minutes is killing his knees, but he is pushing and he is doing well. And we have it broken up into like 5-minute segments. And we're just going to keep adding a minute. Right. And, hey, the second big thing is just eat real food. If it has roots or a mother, eat that. Start there. Like, if you can catch it. Yes. Make this incredibly simple. There's so much confusion out there when it comes to all sorts of fad diets. All the diets are a tool. Your diet doesn't need to have a name. Eat real food, get enough protein, and take a walk. And then if you're able and you're not 600 pounds, we'll work to it. Pick up something heavy 3 times a week for 45 minutes. Everybody can do that. If you're in a busy season of life, building muscle is incredibly hard. Keeping it's actually incredibly easy. If you're in a busy season of life, if you can devote 2 days a week to do a full body workout, you're not going to make a ton of forward progress, but you're not going to go backwards. So the studies show that in America, most people actually don't gain weight spring, summer, fall. They gain weight during the winter and never lose it. And they compound that decade after decade. Yeah. And that's it. So if you know that winter is coming up, make a plan. Maybe you are busy. Maybe you're going to do a ton of travel. Okay, well, just think about this. If you eat 3 meals a day in a month, that's 93 meals. If you say to yourself, you know what? I want to make sure that 90% of the meals that I eat are from roots or a mother, clean, whole food. Okay, cool. That means you could have 8 meals out of those 93 and still be 90% to target. You're telling me you can't do family pizza night and your Christmas gathering and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and still stay on target? Yes, you can. I prepped for a bodybuilding show and still had 1 giant plate of Christmas dinner last year. It was fine. Right. And I always say this too. I was telling one of the girls that I hired to coach alongside of me. And I was telling her, hey, the people that sign up in Q4 are always the best clients because they realize the holidays are coming, but some kind of switch has gone off in their brain. And they're like, I got to make this change now. And I'm not waiting till January. We're going now. And so, I encourage people just to play the long game and realize, like, hey, the commitment to physical resilience and cultivating discipline does not need to involve even a gym membership. I think that can be helpful. But you can get a set of adjustable dumbbells from Bowflex and a TRX system for a couple $100 and put it in your garage, right? You can lace up those shoes and go for a walk, and you can not keep the donuts in the house. Like, this is all very attainable for any human being. So all we're after is proper stewardship and capability. You do not need to be an elite athlete. You do not need to be shredded or a runway model. Please don't. In fact, if you're married with kids and have responsibilities or investing in your community, you probably ought not pursue that. I say this all the time. Young guys will come and ask me, or younger guys will come and ask me about competing in bodybuilding or strongman. And if they're newly married, I tell them no. Like, the reason that I can do it is I work from home. And in many ways, going to the gym is kind of my vocation. I put a lot of tutorials out and do things like that. But when I went through a period of time in my marriage where it almost didn't make it, where strongman was my idol. And I was working for Amazon. I was a customer service operations manager. And I was up every day at 4 at the gym, at the office by 7:30, home by 5. But my family always got the worst of me. And Saturday was Strongman Saturday. So I'm going and killing myself for 4 hours. And I went through a period of time where I was not a devoted husband and father like I should
Yep.
be. And my family was always getting the exhausted, burnt out me. And that was detrimental. And so I don't encourage, young married men to get involved in those physical pursuits unless they have a job that allows them to somehow do that. But anybody can devote 45 minutes to an hour, 3 days a week of picking up something heavy and go for a walk.
Yeah.
That's doable for anyone.
Yeah. That's good, man. What is, and we all know this, but we know the physical has an impact on the mental, and spiritual even. As we kind of close this, can you talk about that a little bit? The impact that being physically fit has on your mental life and your spiritual life.
Oh man, I'm glad you brought this up. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday that was onboarding, and she's a sweet woman of faith, and she's been struggling with anxiety. And as I'm probing deeper, she has major gut issues. Somewhere along the way, we moved the seat of the emotions to the heart. We say things like, I love you with all my heart. But what does Paul say in the old King James? I long for you with all my bowels and mercies. Yeah, right. And so, the ancients knew this. 90% of the serotonin produced in our body is produced in the gut. It's a happy, feel good feeling. So if your gut is off, if you are eating like trash, your whole mood, your entire disposition, right? And we do know that the psychological affects the physical as well. When David was living in sin, he describes it as his bones aching. Yep. We know what it's like when we're in trouble with our parents or, with an authority figure, and you just kind of get that nervous and your stomach's kind of just in a knot. Yep. So of course, what we feed ourselves is going to have some kind of physical manifestation. And so you are going to be a sharper person. You're going to think better. You're going to have more energy to deal with the responsibilities of life when you eat well. This is just widely known and experienced. I can't tell you how many times clients will get with me after 2 to 3 weeks and they'll be like, I cannot believe it. I feel so much better. My mind is so much clearer. I'm like, well, yeah, you ate a steak instead of 3 packs of Pop-Tarts. Yeah. And so I absolutely 100% agree with that. The two work in hand. When you take care of your physical body, it will enable you to better fulfill your roles as husband or wife.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Can you talk about your business a little bit and where people can find you, can follow you, can get coaching if they need that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, I'm going through a bit of a rebrand right now, and I'll tell you a little bit of that story. Yeah. My business to this point, I've been doing very well for myself, but it's been built around me. And I want to build something that passes the bus test. And what I mean by that is I walk out and I get hit by a bus. I've got really good insurance, but the business dies. Yeah. And so I want to build something that I can, one day walk away from and sell and be proud of. And so I just hired my first coach. I have a few more in the works right now. And so I'm in the middle of a giant rebrand. So you could find me on Facebook just at Anthony Diehl. My Instagram is Meathead Professor. You can thank my high school logic students for that one. And on Twitter, I'm just Coach Anthony Diehl. And I have links to my Jot form on each of those places that you could explore coaching. And as I finish the rebrand here in the next month or so, I'll be spamming all my socials with all of that. But I can do just nutrition coaching. I can do just somebody's strength coaching, or I can do a combination of both. And if somebody really wants to get set on the right path, but maybe they don't have the money to invest in ongoing coaching, I do offer consults where what we'll do is we'll sit down for an hour, we'll get on a video chat, and I will approach them as though they're my client. I'll onboard them and say, here's how I would start you. And here are the high-level principles and kind of the grid through which I make decisions. Now, granted, you're not going to have the ongoing accountability, and normally I would make those decisions, but I can at least get you started and headed down the right path. And so that's a value for some folks as well.
That's good, man. I really appreciate it. This is very, very helpful conversation. Super important. I wish more Christian people, I keep saying that, maybe more do than I know, but this is a constant frustration for me. Is just my life is a mess. I love Jesus, but there's something you can do about that, and it's not that complicated.
Well, let me just tell you, I've been in this space for a long time, been coaching now for 10 years, coaching full-time since 2018. And I'm seeing a massive uptick in people caring.
Good.
I mean, I have been on a lot of podcasts and talking about this, but in the last year, I've been on multiple Christian podcasts. Christians are opening their eyes. Okay. I think COVID served actually to pull the wool off people's eyes and help them realize, hey, the government actually doesn't care about your health. They're not coming to save you. It's your responsibility. If you haven't heard the book, and I'm plugging this book to everyone, but Casey Means' book, Good Energy, she and her brother Callie were just on the Tucker Carlson show a couple weeks ago, did an interview. They've been doing interviews everywhere. And I have been saying some of these things for years and years, and she has the, Stanford education credentials to back it up. And in this book, she just it is the best current assessment of the health crisis in America, the current state of American health, and what to do about it, all in one succinct volume that is accessible to anybody with a sixth grader reading level. And so it's just, I've been plugging this book to everyone. I'm making my new coaches read it. And she highlights what I highlight in my coaching practice is I don't care if you're coming to me. Most of my clients are lifestyle clients, just average Joes. Okay. But I do have some bodybuilders and some strongmen and powerlifters, but I don't care why you're coming to me. 96% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And we define that in 5 key points: blood pressure, 120/80, triglycerides under 150, fasted blood glucose under 100, HDL over 50 for women and 40 for men. And then waist size under 35 for women, under 40 for men. Only 4% of only 6% of Americans can check all 5 of those without medical intervention.
Wow.
So that means 96% of the people that come to me, some of those, all of those, or at least 3 of those are off. If you come to me and you want to be an elite powerlifter or whatever else, we're still focusing on those first. So my goal here is to lead with health and to empower people to say, hey, you don't need to go to the doctor to check your glucose. You can go get a $15 glucometer from Walmart or Walgreens. I can teach you how to use it, when to use it, and how to know if the dietary choices you're making, you're moving in the correct direction. You can get a blood pressure cuff. You don't need to wait to go to the doctor to check your blood pressure. You can control your health. And if you control these 5 things, these are the biggest predictor of longevity. And if these things are out of sync, these are the largest predictors of all-cause mortality and death from completely preventable diseases. God is sovereign. I trust him, but he works with, means to an end. And I have human responsibility. And I know that when God has called my number, it's my time, but I need to be responsible with what I've been given. And I have the tools to do that.
That's good. Anthony, thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we can talk some more. I think we need to talk more about our backgrounds and our upbringing, and someday we'll do that. But thanks for this. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So appreciate Anthony. Great conversation. Please go and check out all the stuff that he does. Again, he talked about this at the end of the show, where you can find him. But if you search for him on social media, particularly on Facebook, Anthony Diehl, you'll find him. Go to his Instagram page. He's got a link tree there as well that links out to a lot of the other things that he's involved in. So please check that out. Very important conversation. I hate that so often we disconnect the physical from the spiritual, the emotional. And we talk about mental health a lot. We disconnect those things, and they should not be. It's a continuum. And I think God has given us responsibility to steward over the physical life that he's given to us. I'm very grateful for that conversation. Thank you for listening. Hope that you are subscribed. If you're not, do that right now. That would be wonderful. And then take some time, go to lifeaudio.com. Lifeaudio.com. You'll find other great podcasts and content there that will also be a help to you. Once again, thank you for joining the conversation. And I will end, as I do every episode, when the bullets are coming your direction, when the world around you seems to be falling apart, you only have 2 choices. Will you stay where you are and die? Will you make that decision? You can. It's a decision. Or will you march? The choice is always yours. Thank you. Talk to you next time.